the past couple of years, several people have said to me, would you please do transition pictures for Neville Goddard? He was a mystic and a biblical scholar in the 1940s and 50s. He began as a dancer on Broadway and in nightclubs, but I think eventually the work dried up, and so he moved to California, where he became a lecturer in the field of the law of attraction and manifestation. Carlos Castaneda, whose transition pictures, by the way, are on the Soul Crossings channel, but Carlos Castaneda, he based some of his beliefs on what Neville Goddard had said. And indeed, Neville Goddard's words and works have transcended the decades. He's still quite popular even now. He died in 1972 at the age of 67 of a brain aneurysm, but I always thought he was a pretty low priority in terms of doing transitions. I didn't really want to know what was going on with him. However, having done his transition, finally got around to it, it was utterly fascinating and had me in tears last night when I was going through this process. Basically, when I went into his energy, he was on the edge of something. I thought it was a cliff, but it could be just an edge of a steep drop. And he went right over. And I remember thinking, as he went over, wow, this is going to hurt. But he landed on a path, and of course, there was no pain. This wasn't a bodily thing by that point. It was just him sinking in his consciousness. And I thought, well, obviously he has to get to some tunnel or other, and then he will cross over. But as I watched, the path he was on began to crumble away. Only it didn't crumble away and he dropped. It collapsed almost, taking him with it. And on the way down, there was one tunnel entrance, which he seemed to go right by. And then when the path finally settled, there was another one. And that's the one he went up. He was almost relieved at this point that it was over. He was like, I understand that there's nothing to fear. I understand that life is a continuum, that it goes on forever, and this is just one phase of it. And he walked along this first tunnel in a very light way. But when he got to that initial chamber thing that I always see, that kind of cave, it was open at the top. There was a bright shaft of light shining down into that chamber. He could see an exit point. And yet he knew that he wouldn't reach it. He knew there was no way out, really. That he couldn't climb. That it was over. He started to walk up this tunnel that I always see. It's metaphorical, it's symbolic, it doesn't exist, but it's a thing that I see that enables me to interpret people's conscious reactions as they transition. As he began to go up this tunnel, he became wistful slightly. He looked back and thought, really, that's it? That's the end of that adventure? Why could it not have gone on for longer? There was no way back. So in the tunnel, this thing I see, this metaphorical tunnel, he carried on walking. But I couldn't get him to go to the top. About halfway up, and remember this is his consciousness, there's no physical body here, but halfway to the top, he crouched down against the wall and started to weep quietly. The feeling was of something he'd missed, something he'd lost. It was tearful contemplation about what he could no longer have, or what he'd done wrong, or just over the loss of potential. Eventually, he made it to the light that I always see, which precedes everybody's ascension. basically. And he stood before it and wouldn't move. He had questions. One of which seemed to be, you give us life and then you take it away before we've fully lived it. You give us the opportunity to learn so many lessons, and just as we get wise, just as we know what we're doing, you remove the opportunity to use it. Why? Why would you do that? And it's almost as if, obviously there are no words exchanged, but it's almost as if Grace said, "You silly goose. You've reached the finish line for that lifetime. Come on." And he said, "But why? Why must I go?" And I swear, this is what came into my head. The reply was, "Because we have other things for you to do." It's like, your job is not done. Come on. And that seemed to be the lure, or convince him to take a step forward into the light. And he did. He went into the light and was gone. But his words still linger today. His books are still available. There are lectures on YouTube that you can still listen to his clipped tones talking about manifestation and the law of attraction and so on. So he has lived on. But his why question was answered with, "Because we have other things for you to do." And that was the transition for Neville Goddard.